There is no horror movie that can compare to the nightmare I experienced last year. I had just gotten out of a complicated 5-year relationship and I wasn't really looking for anything serious. That's why I thought Tinder would be a good option, since many of my friends were using this app and apparently it had worked very well for them to connect with girls for casual encounters, so I gave it a try. As soon as I started using the app, it didn't take me long to get a few candidates. I didn't mess around too much and decided on the hottest one. We agreed to meet a week later. The day came, and the date went so well that we decided to repeat it a few days later. And this then became a regular thing until the 4th date, when it was starting to look like it might turn into something more. Despite my original intentions, when the 4th date was over, I invited her to my house for a drink and she accepted. Once there, things soon got heated and we decided to take our interaction to the next level. However, seconds before the act was to take place, if you know what I mean, she broke down and started crying profusely. I was very confused. I didn't know what I had done to make her react like that. I am not an aggressive partner and her behavior up to that point had been very receptive. So I asked her what was wrong, and that's when she confessed to me that she had been sexually assaulted by a previous boyfriend. She told me that it had been several years and she thought she had gotten over it, but she had not. I felt really bad for her to hear that, but also a little frustrated. Well, the moment was completely damaged. She got up and got dressed quickly, and I stayed in bed for a few seconds, before getting up and doing the same. I will admit it was just as I said, frustrating, but there was little I could do and I understood her situation. I called her an Uber, and after firing her, she left me with a difficult decision to make. But after a long, sleepless night, I decided to end things at this point. It was the best thing for me. I know you guys will say I was cruel, but I really didn't want to deal with all that. I was fighting my own battles and things seemed to be at a stalemate. I wasn't going to wait until she determined she was ready, and I wasn't going to pressure her to do anything either, obviously. So I told myself this was for the best. Besides, I never wanted to jump straight into another relationship so quickly. That wouldn't benefit either of us. I waited a few days and broke things off with her as nicely as I could. That night, it never came up in conversation. I just told her that I felt I had rushed into this relationship too much and needed to take some time. Naturally, she was a little upset, but gave no indication of being very upset. Before I said goodbye, I wished her a happy future, and that she would achieve everything she wanted. Then I said goodbye, and that was it. Or normally that should have been it, but in reality it was more like the beginning of the nightmare. I took a month off from dating on Tinder and all that. And when I came back, I met up with a beautiful grad student who called me to hang out, and that was more than I was looking for. We met for drinks and had a wonderful evening. I went home happy, jumping like a spring, and with my eyes full of sparkle after spending a fantastic night at this girl's house. Maybe 2 or 3 days passed when I received a call from a neighbor. He informed me that there were flyers posted all over our neighborhood where I was mentioned as a predator. At the time, I thought this was his idea of a sick joke, and it was definitely not a good one. I laughed at what he said, but then he spoke to me very seriously, told me that this was no laughing matter, so I asked him to show me proof, and a few minutes later, he came to my door with a piece of bright yellow paper that was some sort of notice. This contained an account from a supposed victim that went something like this. About a month ago, Mr. in my name invited me to a dinner party, and after he treated me to many glasses of wine, he pressed me to accompany him to his house, and although I was clearly in no condition to give my consent, Mr. my name took me with him, taking advantage of my condition, and once there he tried to persuade me to take me to his bed, and when I flatly refused his advances, he became enraged and threw me into the street in the middle of the night. I am making this experience public to make sure that all women are aware of the danger they may face by dating this manipulative and abusive monster. I can't even describe the level of anger I felt at that moment, which got worse when the neighbor asked me if it was true. Of course it wasn't. But when someone asks that kind of question, it's a good indication that they believe it. But instead of strangling him, which was what provoked me, I did my best to assure him that it wasn't, and his reception was less than convincing, but I had more pressing problems at the time. I had to run out and get all those flyers, or whatever they called them, before more impressionable idiots saw them. I spent most of the day removing them from light poles and bulletin boards all over town. I'm still not sure if I got them all, and I counted over 200 that day. When all was said and done, then out of nowhere, I discovered that I had been banned from Tinder after someone filed a complaint against me. My life seemed to be spiraling out of control, and I was desperate to stop it in any way I could, but what came next was probably the biggest mistake I had made during this whole ordeal. I was so full of indignation, I did the one thing I shouldn't have. I contacted her via text message to confront her. When I did, she promised to retract her claims if I agreed to meet her face to face, and as stupid as it sounds, I took the bait like a moron. I drove over to her house and we sat at the kitchen table where she explained how hurt she felt. I wasn't interested in hearing any of it, but I was willing to suffer to save my good name. As I did so, she held a glass of wine in her hand. Clearly, she had been drinking, even before I arrived. After about an hour, everything seemed to be settled. But as I was getting ready to leave, she started to approach me in a very suggestive way. I mean, sexually suggestive in a very obvious way. And the truth is, I almost fell for it. But then I remembered our previous problem and stopped her. I made it clear to her that that would not happen, and she was not happy about that. When she realized she wasn't going to get what she wanted, she hissed and went into the kitchen. I figured she was having some more wine and it seemed like a good time to sneak out, but I was putting on my jacket when I heard a clatter coming from the kitchen. I walked over to see what was going on and was met with a shrill shriek. She ran at me with the stem of a broken wine glass and stabbed me with it, then withdrew the jagged stem from the wound and snarled at me like a bloody wild animal. I was in shock and froze for a brief moment, not knowing how to react. Then she lunged at me again, and that's when I thawed and took off running. She chased me to my car, banging it like a madwoman, while I accelerated to get out of there as soon as possible. I drove straight to the hospital, calling 911 on the way. I informed the operator which hospital I could be found at if the police needed to speak with me, and sure enough, an officer arrived as I was being treated for my injury. Fortunately for me, the broken glass had not touched any major organs, arteries, or other vital thing. The cop let me know that my assailant had been arrested, but what came next was a complete surprise. I was chilled to learn that she had a prior conviction for harassment and assault, and I assumed it was a similar situation. Monday came, and despite what I expected, my attacker was granted bail. In short, she paid up and was out in time for dinner. I was furious, and as I waited for the day of trial to arrive, I remained in a constant state of fear. I could have sworn I saw her once or twice during that period, but I was in such a fragile state that it was possibly my imagination. She became everything I thought about. At home, at work, even in my dreams she took center stage. This woman, she rejected all plea bargains and insisted that the jury would acquit her. I know it was all a delaying tactic, and she was gathering all the elements she would need for what she was sure would be to disappear. And the first rumblings began during jury selection, as she had not been present for the proceedings, and although she was not required to be, it did not bode well for her absence. When the trial began in earnest, her attorney was finally forced to admit that he had lost contact with his client several weeks ago. That was in July 2023, and to this day, she has not been heard from. Hopefully, she has done the wise thing and is on the other side of the world right now. However, not knowing of her whereabouts is something that generates a great deal of anxiety for me, because she could literally be anywhere and perhaps planning to do something against me. A woman who has been able to stab you with a broken glass is capable of anything, and so I live in a constant state of alert then. I fear that one day I will come home from work, and when I open the door of my apartment, she will emerge screeching like a wild boar like last time. But instead of a glass, now she has a knife and will finally do her job of stabbing me to death. Last year, I took one of the most important steps in my life. I opened up to my parents about my sexual orientation, letting them know that I am gay. I consider myself very fortunate, as my parents supported me. I am currently 24 years old and work for a software company. I recently dated a guy for a couple of months, but somehow we both decided to call it off, as it wasn't working out the way we had hoped. However, I decided to do some casual dating after that, and for that I started using Tinder. After 2 or 3 days of searching and swiping left, I was matched with a guy with the profile name of Liam the Wolf. What can I tell you? Nowadays, people use a lot of strange names to get attention and followers on social media. The profile picture was of a tall and handsome guy, so I found it interesting, but we were accidentally matched, and that's how we started talking. The guy told me his real name was Liam and that he worked in a garage as an auto mechanic. The more we talked, I could tell he was charming, and he also told about his sexuality last year to his mother. But unlike my parents, his mother cut off all contact with him. After hearing this, I felt pretty bad for the guy, because some people in the world still think that being gay is some kind of disease, while in reality it's just another expression of love and choice. We talked for a few days, and every time he brought up how bad he felt about his mother's behavior, I always supported him and tried to encourage him to accept his true self. One day I told him that we should catch up sometime. I thought he would be excited to meet me, but his response surprised me. We were on a call when I asked him this, and he replied, well, I think I still need some time. If you don't mind, we can wait a few more days. I immediately understood his discomfort and told him, oh sure, no problem. Take your time. A week passed and we continued talking as usual, without any news. One night, coming back from a friend's house, I was walking from the sidewalk and there were very few people on the street. It was already late, so I walked fast to get home as early as possible. It was a moonlit night and crickets were chirping in the distance. I was about to take the turn leading to my house when suddenly I felt someone following me. I immediately turned around and saw a man in a hoodie. He was standing in the middle of the road, a few steps away from me. Because of his hoodie, I couldn't see his whole face. The only thing I could see was his mouth. And I noticed that he was constantly licking his lips in a very strange way. I was almost close to my house, so I decided to walk very fast, avoiding this man. And as soon as I reached the door, I looked back again, but the man was no longer there. I entered the house very scared and sat on the couch for a while. To be honest, the expression on the man's face, even though I couldn't see his face completely, scared the hell out of me, and I found it very disturbing. I was happy to be near my house when the encounter happened. After dinner, I went to bed early. That's when I heard my phone ring and saw that Liam texted me asking me how my day was. I told him about this creepy guy following me home. He also replied that it was really weird and that I should have said something to that crazy guy. At that point, I felt a little embarrassed for being scared so easily. I decided that if I ever saw that guy again, I would teach him a lesson. I was tired, so I fell asleep quickly after cutting off the conversation with Liam. The next morning when I woke up, I went to check my mailbox outside, and there I found a letter inside the box. When I opened the letter after entering the house, my heart skipped a beat to read what this one said. When I see you again, you will not come home alive. I was sure this was the work of the creepy guy from last night. My mind was terribly disturbed all day after that. I decided to go to the police with the letter before I went home that night. Then I thought, before this psycho tries to harm me in any way, I will go to the police and ask for protection. As I was leaving the office, I got a call from Liam. He said, "Hey, where are you?" I told him the whole thing and said I was on my way to the police station. Then he said, "Oh my God, I can't believe that creepy guy dared to do that. Anyway, since you are going to the police station, then I will cancel the plan tonight." I asked him what plan, and he said in a shy voice, "I actually thought I should invite you to dinner tonight. I am ready to take whatever we have to the next level." At that moment, I really thought I could use a night of good conversation and a nice time with a friend. So I said, "Okay, I can go. It will really give me some peace of mind." Liam laughed warmly and said, "Why don't you come over to my place for dinner? Then we'll go to the police together. If you don't mind if I come along, of course." I was very happy to see his kind gesture, so I immediately agreed to meet him for dinner. He gave me the address of his house, which luckily was quite close to my workplace. I took a cab and arrived at his house in 15 minutes. Liam was standing at the door. He smiled at me and welcomed me. He was handsome and had a beautiful, warm smile. I sat down on his couch. He handed me a glass of wine and we started talking. I told him about my life and my family while sharing some funny anecdotes with him. We finished the first glass of wine and he poured me another. Then he said, "What does this man look like that is bothering you?" I took a few sips of wine and said, "Well, I didn't see his face, but he was licking his lips in a very strange way and..." Before I could continue the story about that incident from the night before, the horror unfolded in front of my eyes. Liam smiled in a very sinister way before interrupting me and saying, "You mean like this?" and started licking his lips in the same way the man did last night. Seeing that, I jumped up from the couch and panic began to invade me from head to toe. I started to grope my way backwards, absolutely terrified. "Oh my God, it was you? You tricked me." I was about to run for the door, but my legs felt so heavy and clumsy that I couldn't react. I began to feel very dizzy and lightheaded, and my eyes began to slowly close. I realized that I had been drugged. The bastard had put something in my wine, but before I could do anything, I passed out. When I woke up, I found myself lying on the floor. My hands and legs were tied with ropes. Liam was standing in front of me with blood-red eyes. There was a sharp knife in his hand and he smiled at me, but that gesture was not matched by his rage-filled eyes. "I told you you wouldn't come home the next time I saw you," he said. In a panicked voice, I asked him, "Why are you doing this? Why do you want to kill me?" Liam licked his lips and said, "My mom died of shock when my brother came out and told her about his sick and aberrant sexuality. I lost her to sick people like you. You people are all depraved and sick." While he was saying all those crazy things, I managed to free one of my hands, but still I kept sitting there silently. I don't know why. But suddenly my parents' faces flashed in front of my eyes and I imagined the pain of both of them if this crazy man ever did anything to me. At that moment, I regained my courage and started to think of a way out. All of a sudden, Liam yelled, "I will kill you, you and every one of you." He said that with a level of hatred I had never seen before, and then started walking towards me with the knife. But to my surprise, the initial panic I felt turned to courage, and I told him in a firm voice, "If anyone is sick in this world, it's you, you fucking psycho." The next moments fell like a bolt of lightning. Liam jumped on me, giving a fiendish scream. "You're dead, you fucking deviant." But before he could stab me, I kicked him in the chest and he fell backwards, shuddering to the floor. Without wasting a single second, I grabbed a metal vase that was on the table near the sofa and hit him over the head with it. Blood began to gush out of his forehead as he passed out. I turned him into the police that night and returned home afterwards. He is now rotting in jail on an attempted murder charge. Amazingly, after this case hit the local paper, a high school boy came to the police station and reported that the same man tried to lure him into his home. The boy was a bit shy, and at the time did not want to open up about his sexuality, so even though this bastard tried to assault and kill him, the boy did not go to the police, but somehow managed to escape from this creepy sicko. I had been working for almost 12 hours straight, and when I got home I was completely exhausted, both physically and mentally. When I walked into my room, I could feel a wave of relief at the thought that I could finally rest and disconnect from the responsibilities and pressure of my job. However, just as I was about to lie down on my bed, suddenly my phone started making a loud notification sound. This jolted me out of my drowsy state, and I wondered what could be so urgent. I reached over to my bedside table and picked up my phone, squinting at the brightness of the screen in the dark room. Unlocking it, I noticed a message from an unknown number. The message read, "Miss me? I wish you remembered our first kiss." As I read the words, a shiver ran down my spine. I felt a wave of unpleasant memories flood my memory. That night I had been waiting outside the bar for Casey, my girlfriend, for a few minutes. As I stood there, I felt someone touch my back. This startled me, and I turned around to see a girl in a green jacket smiling at me. This girl was quite beautiful. She had long brown hair and expressive bright brown eyes. However, something about her made me feel uncomfortable and a little scared. It was an unsettling feeling that I couldn't quite figure out at the moment. Maybe it was the intense way she was looking at me, or her strange smile, which seemed uncomfortable, as if she was trying too hard to make a positive impression. I couldn't say what, but something about her made me uneasy. She asked me if I wanted to join her inside the bar, but I politely declined and told her I was waiting for my girlfriend. At which point her smile vanished completely, and her face contorted into a very unpleasant expression. A few minutes later, Casey arrived, and we headed inside the bar together to have fun and a good time. We were having a good time and enjoying each other's company, when I felt a very sharp look on us. Casey noticed it too, and started to look around uncomfortably. Then I looked in the direction of the look and noticed the same girl sitting at the counter staring at us. When she saw that we noticed her, she quickly looked away. As the night progressed, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was still watching us. I finally asked Casey if she wanted to go to my house, and she agreed. As I drove to my house, I kept looking in the rear-view mirror because somehow it felt like someone was following us. But every time I looked, there was no one there. It was very strange. As soon as we arrived at my house, I felt a very strong, uneasy feeling. A feeling that kept coming and going throughout the night. I scanned the surroundings for any signs of danger, and although I couldn't spot anyone suspicious, I still had the nagging feeling that someone was watching us, so not avoiding taking any chances, I turned to Casey and asked him to stay close to me while we went inside. After closing the door behind us, we made our way to the living room where we settled together on the couch. There we spent some time scrolling through the movie options on Netflix until we finally settled on a romantic movie. As the movie progressed, we became more comfortable with each other's presence and the room filled with laughter and whispered comments. Eventually, we found ourselves wrapped in each other's arms and our lips met a very passionate kiss, and naturally we ended up making love. After that, we fell asleep in each other's embrace, and while still the warmth of our love was still in the air, I woke up in the middle of the night, feeling a light touch on my hair. My first thought was that it must be Casey, my girlfriend, trying to wake me up without opening my eyes, so I reached out and grabbed her hand. But when I finally opened my eyes, I was surprised to see that the girl who had been outside the bar that night was standing on the edge of my bed. My heart began to race very hard as I tried to understand what was going on. How had she gotten into my apartment? Why was she touching my hair? I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized that my girlfriend and I were not alone in the room. At that moment, I considered getting up and confronting the intruder, but my body was paralyzed with shock and fear. Suddenly, she leaned over and kissed me, and I was too stunned to react. It wasn't until I regained my senses that I shoved her away. The shock of the moment caused Casey to wake up, and in doing so, she was shocked beyond belief to see a stranger standing there in the middle of the room, while we were both covered by nothing but a sheet. Logically, my girlfriend demanded to know who the woman was, and as I told her I didn't know, the girl grabbed the table lamp and pounced on Casey. But before she could do anything, I grabbed her arms. She started screaming like the mad woman she was, and we began to struggle. Meanwhile, I instructed Casey to call 911. She frantically dialed the emergency number with her hands shaking in panic, recounted the events of the last few minutes to the operator, and after what seemed like an eternity, the sound of sirens coming down the street began to fill the room. During the entire waiting time, I was holding this deranged girl, practically naked, until she almost searched my closet for sweatpants and pulled them on as best she could so the police wouldn't find me in those facades. Fortunately, the police arrived, and their presence in the house brought us a great sense of relief, and we finally felt safe. As the officers escorted this demented girl out of my house, her gaze was locked on mine with such piercing intensity that it left me feeling uncomfortable and terrified, even though she was being taken away. Her eyes seemed to drill into me, and this caused me to feel an intense shiver down my spine, leaving me with a sense of fear that I have rarely in my life come to feel. I am relieved to say that I never saw that girl again after that terrible experience, but the feeling of being watched and haunted stayed with me for quite a while. I prayed to God that I would never have to encounter her again. Although it took a lot of hard work as time went by, I gradually forgot about her and moved on from the horrifying experience until today, when I received this. Hi, my name is Frederick, but everyone calls me Fred. I'm 24 years old and recently moved out of town looking for a job. I've always been an outgoing person, but what happened a few weeks ago has traumatized me for life. I met a girl named Marlene on Tinder. She said she is 20 years old and was currently working at Walmart. She told me she was trying to save for her college education, which I thought was great. That let me see that she was a hard-working girl with aspirations, which is always a good sign. Being an independent go-getter myself, this naturally got me interested in her, so we started texting each other almost as much as possible. Fortunately, I also got a job at a retail company. Things were taking a good turn, so one day I asked Marlene out. She gave me the address of a coffee shop and I got there in time to meet her. I sat down near a large glass window overlooking the street and started checking my phone while I waited for her. But at one point I started to feel that strange feeling you get when you know someone is watching you. It was very intense, and while I hadn't seen anyone until then, I was certain that I was being watched. I immediately looked down the street, which was full of people walking back and forth, so it was hard to spot anyone in particular. I thought it was all in my head, so I ignored it, but a few seconds later I felt that I was being watched again. This time I turned suddenly, and as if my eyes instinctively knew where to look, I immediately detected someone trying to hide behind a tree across the street. My eyes kept looking for this person, but that's when the door to the cafeteria opened and Marlene walked in. She approached my table and said, "Are you looking for me?" Her comment made me smile, albeit awkwardly, and after greeting her with a kiss on the cheek, I told her about this strange incident that had just happened, but we quickly put it behind us and started chatting about more pleasant things. Marlene and I had a very nice time together, and from that day on, we began to grow closer and closer. Marlene often stayed at my house after work, and in general, we always had a wonderful time. But sometimes I noticed that she got lost in her thoughts, and it was as if she was in another dimension, one very much her own and impenetrable. One night we went to see a movie, but halfway through it, she suddenly stood up and simply said, "I want to go home." I thought she was feeling sick or something, so I got in the car and drove her to my house. She didn't say anything on the way, but afterwards, I asked her what had happened to her, and naturally my first impression was that she had felt bad for some reason. So that's what I asked her, but then she looked at me with an angry face and replied that yes, she was sick of me looking at the actress as if she wasn't even there. Honestly, her response made me laugh, as I found it a little funny to see that she could be jealous of an actress in a movie. At first I thought it was cute that she valued me so much, and that night I made dinner for her. I also made things right with her. However, as time went on, I realized that there was something very wrong with this girl. One night I went out with two of my office colleagues for a couple of drinks. Marlene wanted to come over that night, but I told her I had other plans, so I would see her tomorrow. I got home around 11 p.m. I was feeling pretty drunk, so I went to my room and threw myself on the bed. I don't really remember how long I slept, but suddenly I felt like something different was happening in my house. I can't explain that feeling, but it scared me. Suddenly I slowly opened my eyes, and as I looked at the bedroom door, my heart jumped into my throat. I barely closed the door to my room as I entered, so it was already half open. But what really scared me was to see Marlene standing there, completely motionless like a statue and looking at me with a devilish expression, while the light from the room half illuminated her. She looked very creepy. I gasped and woke up with an intense shiver. What the hell? My God, Marley, you scared me. She started laughing as if what she did was something very funny, then slowly walked over to my bed, hugged me, and fell asleep. I went back to sleep, trying not to make a big deal out of her strange behavior, and decided to talk to her about it in the morning. When I woke up the next day, I noticed that Marlene was gone. I immediately called her and said, "Marley, what were you doing at my house last night?" I was going to tell her that I don't like people sneaking into my house without telling me, but before any words could come out of my mouth, she replied, "What are you talking about, Fred? I stayed with my mom last night. You told me you had other plans, so I made my own plans too. Are you sure it was me?" This question scared me, and a lot, as her tone sounded completely serious. "But you were here. You were watching me sleep," I told her. She began to laugh as if I had said something very funny, and then she said to me, "Oh my dear Fred, you must have dreamed about me. I told you. You'll miss me when I'm gone. See you tonight, love." And I've cut the call short immediately, before I could refute anything, leaving me with a deep sense of bewilderment. I couldn't concentrate on my work all that day. All I could think about was how real it had all been. I could almost feel her touch as she slept next to me all night. Then I thought maybe I was too drunk, and in fact, I convinced myself of that. A few days later, I arranged to meet Marley at that same coffee shop where we first met. There we talked for a while. Then a colleague of mine named Pamela came into the store, and I introduced her to Marlene. She smiled at her, and after spending some time in the coffee shop, we arrived home. It was Sunday, so I told Marley to sleep over, and she agreed. I was making fries in the kitchen. When I turned around, I saw her standing behind me with an expressionless face. Obviously, I was a little startled and said, "My God, Marley, when are you going to stop doing this?" She replied, "Doing what?" "How long were you standing there?" I asked. It's kind of creepy, you know. The truth is, I don't know what about what I said seemed so wrong to her, but she suddenly became furious. And out of the blue, she asked me, "What's wrong with Pamela?" I honestly didn't expect that question at all, because Pamela spoke to us for barely a minute. But as she stood there, visibly furious, I stood there wide-eyed and said to her, "Marlene, You're overthinking it. Pamela and I just worked together, and it was a coincidence that we ran into each other today in that cafe. But her attitude after my response completely stunned me. She ran up to me and started screaming in my face things like, "Oh, do you really think I don't see you? Do you really think I didn't notice you were texting on your phone while we were sitting in the coffee shop? Maybe you texted her to come over. Do you think I don't know those tricks? Do you think I haven't seen you talking to her in the office? You're not going to fool me with your good boy face." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I was completely shocked and speechless for a moment. But then, feeling very annoyed, I replied, "That means you're secretly watching me. That night wasn't a dream at all, was it, Marley? You are a very strange person, you know." But what happened next definitely exceeded my expectations. Marlene, overflowing with fury, let out a terrifying shriek and lifted the hot frying pan from the stove. And before I could do anything, the hot metal started hitting my head so hard that I passed out on the floor screaming in pain. And when I woke up, it took me some time to realize where I was. My head felt heavy, as did my body. I began to feel intense generalized pain, but when I tried to sit up, I found myself bound hand and foot inside a closet in my room. I could not believe that this woman had beaten me to death, tied up and locked me inside my own closet. She also covered my mouth so I couldn't scream. The skin on my back, head and arms burned from the frying pan burns, and as I tried to find a way out of the horrible situation, a familiar voice came to my ears. "Where's Fred? Is he okay?" I was sure it was Pamela's voice. I thought to myself, what the hell is she doing in my house? But then I heard Marlene's voice, and that sent chills down my spine. She was talking to Pamela as if nothing had happened all this time. Then I saw them both come into my room, and then Marlene said, "Fred talks about you a lot. I guess you guys are pretty close, huh?" Pamela was sitting on my bed, while Marlene was standing in front of the closet door. Then Pamela replied in an awkward voice, Yeah, he's a good friend. Where is he now? You told me he needed my help. What's going on?" At that moment, my eyes widened in absolute horror, because I could see the danger coming. Marlene was holding a kitchen knife in her hand, and it was hidden behind her, so there was no way Pamela could see this coming. I panicked, thinking that all this time I was dating a fucking psycho killer, and now she wants to kill my partner too just because I talked to her this morning. I immediately tried to break free with all my might, which obviously ended up making deaf thuds inside the closet. Pamela stood up and said, "What is that sound?" To which Marlene replied in a chilling voice, "I think it's coming from the closet. Why don't you check it, Pamela?" My poor companion was unable to see the ulterior motive behind my crazy girlfriend's words, and therefore had no idea what was going to happen next. As I walked to the closet, Pamela opened the door and saw me bleeding from the head and tied up like a prisoner. Seeing this, she gasped in horror and turned around, only to see Marlene smiling devilishly and holding the knife up. And before I could react in any angina way, Marlene lunged at her, trying to stab her. But luckily by that time I had already managed to free my hands from the rope, and when at the precise moment she went at Pamela with the knife, in an instinctive movement, I interposed myself between them, which caused Marlene to stab me in the arm. I screamed in pain, but before she could do anything more violent, I knocked her out with one blow. I had never hit a girl in my life, nor do I think I ever will again, but believe me, in this case it was a matter of death. Marlene was crazed and armed, and she was very, very dangerous. And if she hadn't been, maybe Pamela and I would be dead right now. Immediately after, I called the police and told them what happened, and within 10 minutes there were 2 squad cars and an ambulance stationed in front of my building. The paramedics assisted me and rushed me to the hospital. I bled a lot, and they gave me 6 stitches in my arm and 3 in my forehead. in addition to treating me for second-degree burns over a large part of my head, my back, and my face, which indicates that after I passed out she continued to hit me, as I only remember being hit in the head before I lost consciousness. But the injuries on my face and back indicate that that is what she did. Pamela told the cops all about how Marlene tricked her into coming to my house, and it all seemed so surreal that I couldn't believe what was happening. The cops arrested Marlene, and a couple of weeks ago I got a call from them, and they informed me that Marlene had been referred to a mental institution. I don't know if it was because of how hard I hit her, because of her obvious underlying mental problem, but she was experiencing short-term memory loss at the moment. I asked the authorities to inform her family, but they told me that her parents, who were immigrants, died a long time ago and she literally had no one in the country. Knowing this, I felt sorry for her and was thinking of visiting her, so I asked the officer how she was now. Then I was told that she was talking to herself and laughing to herself, but sometimes she would call the doctor by my name and say, "Don't worry, Freddie, I will see you again. I like to see you sleeping." This gave me chills, and I definitely never want to see Marlene again. I moved to New Zealand at the end of 2018. I fell in love with this country from day one, but I didn't know anyone, so I felt a bit lonely. So I decided to download the dating app Tinder to try to find a nice guy to go on some dates, or maybe even find myself a long-term boyfriend, who knows. The thing is, I ended up matching with this guy who had come from Australia, and we chatted for 2 weeks before we finally met. The conversation was pretty light, nothing too intense or deep, just a fun and enjoyable chat. As I said, he was from Australia, so we talked about Australian things, and I remember telling him how much I wanted to visit the Sydney Opera House. And he told me he had been there once or twice and started making recommendations of some great places that his country. Also, he mentioned many great coffee shops he knew of in the city we were in, mentioning that it would be excellent to meet at one of them. I thought this was excellent, as I was new and there were many places I didn't know about. He seemed like a nice, normal guy, and when we agreed to meet, he was happy to do so, but then, maybe 5 days or so before we met, he became really persistent and impatient. He would text me several times a day, and if I didn't respond right away, he would ask me if something was wrong. I thought it was strange that he was being so clingy so fast. He was so impatient that he kept trying to move the date up so we could meet earlier, and he completely forgot that I told him I was too busy the other days, almost like he wasn't paying attention or didn't care what I had to say. Honestly, it was very strange for someone to be so persistent with me. Sure, I've had guys before who were pushy, but his seemed like a nervous excitement, a different kind of excitement that didn't fit with the confident, cool guy impression he gave me at first. He was very pushy, and I just couldn't understand why he couldn't wait until the Sunday we had agreed to meet. It felt very narcissistic, and I should have seen him as the big red flag he was. I should have never met him at all. I had the messages saved on my phone for a while. I had a record of the exact dates and times he sent some of the messages. That Sunday, when we arranged to meet, he sent me a message just after 9 a.m. saying, "Good morning, how are you?" I didn't respond to that message because I was asleep, and this seemed not to please him, because an hour later, he wrote me back saying it was okay if he had already changed his mind and didn't feel like going on the date. This message seemed like annoyance. That's when I replied and confirmed that I would meet him later. That day we met up and went to a bat that seemed pretty standard to me. It was very popular and a lot of people go there, but it's definitely more of a late-night bar. I had never drank there during the evening or day, but it was open and seemed to have a good atmosphere. I wasn't too convinced about meeting there on our first date, but he insisted, and as I told you, he was a pushy guy, and I just didn't want to have to deal with his intensity for that too, so that's where we met. When I saw him, I must say that he didn't make a big impression on me. He was a good-looking guy, but not too much. But I did notice that he was a little bigger than he looked in his pictures. I mean, he was a little overweight. I didn't make a big deal about it after all. We all lie a little bit in our profile picture. He had big, expressive eyes, mind you. His haircut was very neat. His clothes looked freshly washed and pressed, and he generally looked very well groomed. I remember asking him a lot of different questions, and he just talked at length about himself, his tastes, the things he had done, which were many and very interesting. But at one point, things started to fall apart, mainly because I caught him in some lies, i.e., he had told me he worked at one place and then came out with another. He had told me a certain anecdote from his life somehow, and then told me something else. Similarly, he seemed to be too interested in talking about himself, but I think he only asked me a couple of questions in the whole evening, and they were very superficial things, also interrupting me in my answers to tell any anecdote or make any comment, but always turning the attention of the conversation back to himself. This was another big red flag that I ignored, but then another red flag appeared that was even bigger and flashier than that one. He started talking about how most of his friends were cops or involved with the law in some way. He even mentioned that one of his best friends was a British Crown Court prosecutor. But beyond that, many of the things he mentioned that night had to do with criminal issues. He talked a lot about the dead bodies of cops and the ways in which people can be killed. He talked about justice in the court system and expanded on this topic. And that conversation was just too bizarre for a first date. As I said before, we talked quite a bit about him being friends with many different police officers and going way too deep into the details of certain investigations that they apparently shared with him. Then he mentioned that the police corps sniffer dogs can only detect decomposing flesh about 4 meters deep in the earth. So, if the bodies are buried deeper, the police won't be able to find them. I thought this was a bit of a morbid thing to talk about on a first date, but it was an interesting fact, however. He also got into a conversation about all the different types of venomous snakes in Australia, and was quite animated about it. This let me see that he also had a great passion for the natural world, which was also a bit out of place. But I thought it was cute, because I am also a big animal lover. So I was glad that we had something in common at last. Our conversation turned to that for a while, namely our passion for the natural world, for animals and conservation. At this point, I felt a bit more relaxed and had forgotten a bit about the above, until he again started telling me spooky stories, but now they were moving into another realm. He started talking about how crazy it is that a man can make a small mistake and then go to jail for the rest of his life for it. He went on to tell me about this guy he knew in Oz who had consensual intimacy with his partner, which involved choking, then ended up accidentally killing her in the process. She assured me that it was all a horrible, tragic accident, how things just suddenly went wrong, and how if the guy was really upset because he loved her and would never hurt her on purpose. But still, the guy was charged with manslaughter and sent to prison for a long time. What I know now is that this could have been him trying out his story on me himself. When he could see that I was a little uncomfortable with what he was saying, he tried to change the subject, but the bad was already done. This was definitely going somewhere else. Even though I felt uncomfortable, I didn't try to make a quick exit. Let's just say I'm used to dealing with all kinds of people. Let's just say I've had quite a few experiences and dealt with so many people, so I didn't want to do something abrupt. We continued on the date, and after about 3 hours or so, I made some excuses as to why I had to leave, and we said our goodbyes. As we parted ways, he pointed to where my car was and told me he would accompany me. But the truth is, I didn't feel comfortable, especially since I never told him what car I had. Instead, he not only knew what it was, but where it was parked. At that moment, many things started to go through my mind. I looked at him out of the corner of my eye and realized that he was much bigger than me, so I would have no chance to defend myself if this man were to assault me in any way. At that moment, I decided to dissimulate. I saw that other people were going to the parking lot very close to my car, and it was then when I took the opportunity to walk to my car. He followed me and tried to get conversations out of me as a way to delay until the people in the car next to me left. But I told him that I had to leave quickly, so I started my car, and without giving him a break, I drove very fast to my house, so as not to give him a chance to follow me. Looking back, I realized that it was the most important decision of my life because a few weeks later, I saw a case in the news that left me cold. It turns out that just a day before we met, this man, whose name was Jesse, had murdered a girl in his hotel room after their first date. This was a British girl named Grace McLean, and when I saw the details of the case, a shiver ran through my whole body. Because then, it all clicked, and the truth hit me with the force of a hurricane. The reason he had brought up his friend accidentally strangling his girlfriend is because that is exactly how he had killed this girl the night before, although he had indeed done it on purpose. But this was what he said to justify himself to the authorities. I also remembered that he had mentioned the Toggery range when he told me about the sniffer dogs, and funnily enough, that was where he ended up disposing of her body, and all that other stuff about the sniffer dogs was research he had been doing the night before, and was surely still consuming his mind. It's hard to look back and think that that had just happened to her, and it could have happened to me too. From what I understand, while we were on our date, her body was still in that hotel room of hers, hiding under the bed or something, wrapped in a blanket. When I learned this, I really felt terror, because I realized how close I came to having been the next victim, and there was probably nothing I could have done to defend myself. I thanked myself for being a cautious woman and taking my safety seriously, and my intuition for never failing me when I needed it. I knew something was wrong with this man from the moment he started saying those scary things. However, if I had been a little more cautious, I wouldn't have even shown up for that date, because his behavior alone the days before already spoke to me that this man was not a mentally healthy person, so that served as experience for my next interactions with men, which in fact were never again through online dating apps. To this day, I remember that occasion as the time I came face to face with death, and fortunately, I was able to escape it.